Ethiopic traditional manuscripts, and also to look at Catholic backgrounds in the sense of looking at Bibles from 1000 to 1500. And what's fascinating is the individuals during those time periods, for the most part, were not literate in the way we think of literacy. That is, we think of literacy as being able to read a letter and write a letter. What they could do is there was an oral community that would recite the Bible. Somebody had to read the text and recite it and teach the Bible, but then they would take and put these Bible into stories on things like stained glass on doors as you entered into churches. And the little stories were told by each of these pictures, so that a person who necessarily couldn't read or write could talk to you, having heard this orally, and tell you, oh yes, this is about the creation. This is Adam and Eve and the creation in this little picture. And there's thousands of these Bibles, and on these Bibles they have what are called illuminations, which are pictures. We would call them pictures, but they're paintings, both on the cover and inside. And so we got to look at dozens and dozens of these type of illuminations where there's pictures of all kinds of biblical scenes. And if I were to show you, one of these times I'm going to show you these, and it's fascinating because when I show them to you, having read the text, I'll say to you, what scene do you think you're looking at here? And you'll be able to tell me the story and pick it out because you know the background. But like for instance, they have the Binding of Isaac, where you have obviously an older man standing over somebody with a knife, and he's laying on the altar, and you can kind of see that this is the Binding of Isaac because of the background. And then maybe in the corner there'll be like a ram, kind of off in the corner, that kind of thing. So just fascinating that there's all this history, and I had, to be honest with you, I had not looked at the mass amount of literature that Catholicism has produced through the centuries, just mass amounts of literature. So I was intrigued by that side of things, and so it was very interesting to go in and just kind of walk through some of this history. Just fascinating stuff. How many of you are familiar with the Catholic background stuff? Okay. All right, some of you are, but I was intrigued by all of these documents, all these Bibles that they've printed over, copied and printed over the years. Yes?
My sister has been to the Vatican several times because she's a professor, and it's amazing how much information, how much stuff they have.
Yeah.
Research and history, everything,
Yeah, absolutely voluminous. Just volume after volume of just looking at the stuff. It's just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Like we talked about, people were not literate in reading. When Janet and I was on the island of Nukuheva in 1982, the Catholic Church, the wood carvers had carved all of these things.
Yeah, they have the wood carvings. The wood carvings are fascinating. The stained glass.
Icons.
Yeah, icons. But really, think about doors that are huge leading into the churches. And on the outside of the door, they'll have a metal, it's covered by metal, and this metal tells in little stories like this, all the way up and down. There's like 6 or 7 stories being told by what you see coming in the door. And then when you walk in on the altar, there will be some artwork on the altar. Then you look at the stained glass on the side, and then everywhere you go, you're kind of bombarded by these little stories. So it's fascinating. And they kind of tell their theology along with that. You see some interesting things that come out in the artwork.
Well, people couldn't read.
Right. So when people can't read, what you do is somebody tells them the story orally, and then somebody who does the artwork creates these pictures, and then people though who can't read or write can say, oh yeah, this is about Adam and Eve. You could walk up to them and say, tell me what you see here. They go, oh, that's Adam and Eve. We know this story. And they can tell you the whole history of the Bible in a sense, all the way from beginning to end almost, in picture form. And yes, fascinating. So even though they can't read or write, they can talk to you about everything that they believe, so to speak, from these pictures and from all this artwork. That's absolutely amazing.
There's a book in Ireland, it's at Trinity University, called the Book of Kells, and it is a Bible that was completely done in illumination.
Yes.
And what they do, it's a pretty famous site that people go see when they go to Ireland. But here's this Book of Kells in this big glass case, and every day they turn the page. Mm-hmm. And it's another just, you can't describe it, it's so ornate.
Yeah, it's very ornate.
And lots of different colors.
Yeah, and their depiction of, I found it interesting, their depictions of God, often in these illuminations.
They're right here.
No, it was interesting. They would have, if you look, there's always this hand coming down. Just a hand from above. And so you'll just see this kind of hand come down, and that's their depiction of God. In a lot of these illuminations, it's fascinating. So, because you're wondering, well, where did they get this revelation? Where did this stuff come from? Well, then you look up above the painting, if you look at the top of it, and all of a sudden there's a hand that kind of just comes down. Nope. Now, sometimes obviously they do pictures of Jesus and that kind of stuff, but fascinating how they portray him.
Greek Orthodox as well.
Yeah. So what I'm hopeful to have sometime in the near future is one of the ladies that spoke. She's a Catholic scholar, but she's big on these medieval manuscripts, huge on these medieval manuscripts. And I want you to see the history of how a segment, this is the group when we had the first century. First century, we have Catholics going this direction. It moves into Catholicism quite quickly. And then we have Judaism on this side. Okay? And the parting of the ways, they just go their own directions ultimately. Geographically, they go their own directions. Textually, they go their own directions. As most of you are aware, the language of the Catholic Church, Latin. So they moved away from Greek and Hebrew to just doing everything in Latin. So they do their liturgies and they do their readings in Latin.
Why was that?
Well, because you have to think that we have the Roman Empire, and as Rome is in control of basically what we now call the Middle East at that time, one of the languages of the elite, especially, was Italian, and so or Latin too, and so Latin becomes a language that that whole region uses, and just becomes the language that they choose to. The Vulgate was written in Latin, but became a very popular translation, and so that's what we have. And so
the Roman Empire adopts Christianity as
yeah, and then eventually the Roman Empire, yeah, eventually the Catholicism is adopted by the Roman Empire, and the empire spreads it. Now, what you see in that, though, here's another thing that becomes fascinating, is that the kings first the Romans, and then the kings of England as we move into Europe, the kings are portrayed as divine, which means this: don't mess with the king, because if you mess with the king, you're messing with God. The divine right of kings, that God placed a king there. Therefore, if you mess with the king, you're messing with God. That gives them all kinds of authority, all kinds of power.
Egypt did the same thing.
Yes.
In a sense, but how about
Pharaoh was considered the
Pharaoh's considered divine.
how about the translations for the Latin? Was the Latin, did they pull more from the Greek?
They pull from the Greek.
So there could be some issues.
Yeah. So what's interesting is Latin is when Jerome translates. He's one of the first translators. When Jerome translates from Greek to Latin, he's using the Septuagint. So and for that reason, the Ethiopic Old Testament is also Septuagint, Greek. So it's fascinating that these traditions are using not the Masoretic text type, but are using the Septuagint, which is interesting when you compare the Masoretic text with the Septuagint, because there are at times differences. And so those differences, while they may not be theologically big, are different. Just different. Here's a classic example. This is a big one. This is one of those big issues. As an example, if you're reading Masoretic text, you get to Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7 uses the Hebrew word alma. Alma. And most grammarians, most people who do language will tell you, well, alma is just basically a young girl. That's primarily what it means, without any reference to anything else. Just she's a young girl. When you go to the Septuagint translates Isaiah 7 as Parthenos. Okay, that's the Greek word that's used as Parthenos, which does mean in Greek virgin. Okay. Now we get to Matthew. Matthew is using Greek because he's writing in Greek. He looks back at the Septuagint and says Parthenos, and uses a word that's definitely much more moving in one direction. So it's very interesting how we have a text that's interpreted, a translation that's interpreted. All translations are interpretations and commentaries. All translations are telling you where they're coming from and where they're going. They all have some type of theological agenda, some direction that they're moving you. Okay? That's important. All translations are like this. So whether we're talking Latin, whether we're talking Greek, whether we're talking Hebrew, they all have a direction they're moving us.
But with the word alma, for example, is also within the context that could be translated virgin, because a maiden would not normally be a woman who's sleeping around, so it's kind of an assumed information in that?
That's assumed, but it's not necessarily inherent in the word by itself. Okay. It's assumed by the cultural context, not by necessarily the context of the word. Just that word by itself. It's not necessarily saying that. The cultural context would say that that's the case, but that's the culture driving how you would interpret that more than the word itself.
But I know in one of the scriptures, if you looked at the first part of the verse, it used the alma, and then later on it used the more specific word for virgin, talk about the same person. Yeah, so it seems like there's some interchange going on also.
Actually, and those situations when bitula is used, then it's driving down a little more. Okay, but that's like saying, okay, here's an example. If I say a person has cancer, that's one thing. And as soon as I say they have leukemia, that is cancer, but that's a specific type of cancer. Okay, that's cancer of the white blood cells. That's a different type of cancer. Both are cancers. But as soon as I say leukemia, I've gotten more specific. So all I'm saying is there are times where the Hebrew text will be generic and the translations will be specific, or vice versa. The Hebrew text will be specific and our translations are generic. That's just one example of the kind of thing that can happen within a translation.
Okay, but along that same line, in that particular verse talking about Rebecca, if you could flash forward to Miriam, they said Rebecca had not known a man.
Right.
Well, Mary, there's an argument saying, well, was Jesus really born of a virgin woman, or was she just a young woman? Well, if you go back to Miriam's comment, same thing. She had not known a man.
Right.
So
and that's why
I kind of wonder if it goes back and forth.
That's why I say the Hebrew scripture, when it wants to be definitive, that the person was a virgin, it says she did not know a man.
Ah, okay.
When it wants to nail that down and be definitive, which Matthew does and which other texts do as well, she did not know a man. That tells you she's a virgin. Not necessarily the word itself by itself. Now the culture, like I said, may inform you that would be the norm. That's again more cultural. All right, so our text today, chapter 25.